Long ago, before the stars were divided by borders and fleets, before names like Earth and humanity echoed across the galaxy, the ancient race known as the Nithari had looked into the streams of time. Wise beyond measure and silent by nature, the Nithari had no interest in conquest or rule. They observed, they remembered, and most of all, they warned. Their most sacred vision was passed down through crystal memory, carved into the air of their temples. It told of a species that would arrive not with roaring engines, but with curiosity burning like a sun in their hearts. This species would not be the strongest, nor the oldest, nor the most advanced, but they would carry something inside them more powerful than all those things combined. The Nithari saw this species reaching out to stars, surviving where none could survive, adapting where others failed, and, when pushed, unleashing a wrath that would tear empires down. They called this vision the Sleeping Flame. The Nithari elders warned the Council of Stars, an alliance of powerful civilizations, to leave this species alone should they ever rise. But like most warnings wrapped in mystery, it was slowly forgotten, buried under centuries of politics and pride. In the current cycle, many centuries after the last Nithari elder had spoken the prophecy aloud, the Galactic Council met under the Golden Dome of Tyran Prime. The issue was humanity. In less than 2 decades, humans had spread across nearby systems, turning barren rocks into homes and failed colonies into strongholds. Their science was fast, but their spirit was faster. They didn't rely only on machines, they relied on each other. They spoke of Earth as if it was a living being, and their connection to each other was something even the most advanced AI couldn't understand. At first, the Council had watched them like they watched any new race, a passing interest, a few diplomats, maybe some trade. But then something unexpected happened. Humans didn't just settle, they thrived. They learned alien languages in months. They formed alliances without fear. And where others saw danger, they walked in with open minds. This unsettled the Council, especially the Zarak Dominion and the HFY High Syndicate, who believed humans were growing too fast, becoming too bold. But instead of asking why humans were succeeding, they only saw competition. And the galaxy, they believed, had no room for another dominant power. The vote was held in secret. A soft form of suppression would begin, harmless at first, just a little pressure. Shipping delays, new taxes on human goods, subtle restrictions on travel. Nothing that would spark war, just enough to slow their growth. But humanity didn't slow. Instead, they adjusted. Where one route closed, they opened 3 more. Where technology was blocked, they invented new tools from scratch. When diplomats were pushed out of council meetings, they built their own forums and invited the galaxy to speak freely. Their methods were strange, sometimes chaotic, but they worked. And soon other minor species started to notice. The humans weren't just survivors, they were leaders in disguise. And so, whispers began again in quiet halls and forgotten temples. The Nithari's prophecy, was it about them? One young HFY scholar named Ceylon uncovered an ancient memory crystal deep within the archives of Vale. It spoke of the sleeping flame, of a force that would reshape the stars, not with weapons, but with belief. When she brought her findings to the High Syndicate, they laughed. Stories from the past held no weight in present power. But Ceylon felt something in her bones, an unease, like the first cold wind before a storm. Meanwhile, humans had started constructing a station on the edge of Viralon space, near an unstable star system. Everyone thought it was a mistake, too dangerous, too wild. But within a year, the station not only stood but became a central trade hub. They called it Unity's Edge, and it became a symbol of what humans were: daring, resourceful, and somehow always one step ahead. The Council could no longer pretend nothing was happening. Plans were drawn in secret. Sabotage missions were approved. Small attacks blamed on pirates were arranged near human colonies. But the humans responded not with panic, but with precision. Their defense systems adapted quickly. Their patrols were relentless, and their investigations revealed more than the Council expected. Without announcing war, humanity prepared. Quietly, firmly. Their colonies became fortresses overnight. Their ships, though fewer in number, outmaneuvered larger fleets with unpredictable tactics. And still, the humans did not strike first. They waited. They watched. But when one of their ships was destroyed without warning during a diplomatic escort, something changed. It was no longer about diplomacy. It was about warning the galaxy humanity was not to be cornered. As the Council struggled to contain the growing chaos, a strange message began to echo across deep space. It was a transmission from an ancient Nithari beacon, thought to be lost. It spoke in a calm, ancient voice. Do not awaken the sleeping flame, for when it rises, it will burn through the chains of the stars, and none will be able to put it out. Most didn't understand, but a few remembered, and those few began to fear they had already gone too far. The prophecy was not just a warning. It was a mirror. Humanity had arrived, and their flame was no longer sleeping. It was rising. And the galaxy, blind in its pride, had just thrown oil on the fire. After the attack on their diplomatic escort ship, humanity did not respond with loud declarations or aggressive retaliation. Instead, they became quiet, focused, and calculating. There were no grand speeches or military parades, but within days, movement began quiet, steady, and precise. Colonies increased patrols without needing to be told. Defense systems were upgraded across all borders. Civilian engineers volunteered to strengthen communication relays. Every port and every mining station suddenly started reporting in with perfect timing, without delay, without question. Humanity, as if connected by a single heartbeat, began to prepare for something the rest of the galaxy could not see coming. The Council, on the other hand, believed their efforts had worked. The humans had not launched a counterattack. But what they failed to realize was that the real fight had already begun, and it wasn't being fought with missiles or lasers, but with minds, strategies, and quiet resolve. The Council's next move was subtle but dangerous. Through their control over trade networks, they began imposing silent restrictions. Ships carrying food to human colonies were suddenly delayed by navigation errors. Critical medical supplies meant for outer system settlements were lost in transit. Mining drones purchased from neutral merchants arrived with faulty code. The Council made sure none of this could be directly traced back to them. They wanted humanity to suffer slowly, to feel isolated and helpless. But they had underestimated just how adaptable humans were. Instead of complaining or begging for support, the humans built their own supply routes using outdated freighters. They repaired damaged drones with spare parts and invented workarounds that stunned even experienced alien engineers. Where others would have broken down, humanity evolved. And in this quiet war, every small human victory sent a message far louder than any official transmission: we are not going to break. Soon, the Council tried a different tactic. They began spreading misinformation about humanity to other species. They warned allies that humans were violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. They showed edited footage of Earth's wars, twisting facts to paint them as warmongers. But this too began to backfire. Many species who had worked with humans before remembered their kindness, their curiosity, and the way they treated strangers as equals. One ambassador from the Phylan Coalition had once been saved by a human captain during a transport accident and refused to believe the lies. Others began to question why the Council was so focused on turning the galaxy against a race that had never attacked first. And slowly, behind closed doors, sympathy for humanity began to grow. Back on Earth, human leadership was not made up of generals sitting in shadowed rooms. It was scientists, explorers, community leaders, and people who believed in more than survival. They believed in building something better. A council of thinkers and doers gathered in Unity's edge, and without making a sound, they began forming connections with other independent systems. Not through promises of power, but through honesty. They shared resources, technology, and even opened their stations to alien visitors. These actions confused the Council, but the silence didn't mean weakness. Hidden among the civilian ships were scouts, small, fast vessels equipped with sensors capable of detecting sabotage before it reached their borders. Human intelligence teams began quietly mapping the Council's hidden movements. They uncovered names, secret orders, and supply chains linked to the attacks. Everything was stored in encrypted data cores, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Even though no war had been declared, the humans prepared like it had already started. Their ships, once used for peaceful trade, were retrofitted with defense modules. Colonies that once held farming equipment now had underground bunkers and rapid deploy shelters. Children were taught emergency drills, not with fear, but with calm determination. Humanity was transforming itself, and no one from the outside could fully understand just how fast it was happening. In the shadows of the council, there were some who began to feel uneasy. The Sarnathi scholar who once laughed at the prophecy now found himself reading it again and again, wondering if they had made a mistake. A few delegates started asking questions. Why had the sabotage missions failed? Why were the humans still growing in influence despite the pressure? But every time someone spoke up, they were silenced or reassigned. The council's arrogance was too great, and they believed the humans would eventually give in. What they didn't know was that each act of pressure only made the humans stronger, more united, and more dangerous. Then came the incident at Station Rylos. It was supposed to be a simple delay operation. A group of unknown mercenaries had been hired to disable the docking clamps on a key trade hub used by human and neutral ships. But the humans were already watching. Within minutes of the mercenaries boarding, security teams captured them without firing a shot. A hidden surveillance drone recorded the entire event, showing the faces of Council-linked operatives directing the mission from orbit. The footage was transmitted to Unity's Edge, and within hours, the truth spread like wildfire across independent channels. For the first time, the galaxy saw clear evidence of the Council's secret war against humanity. The Council tried to deny everything, but it was too late. Species who had stayed neutral now started backing away from Council influence. Some even offered quiet support to humanity. What had started as a silent pushback was now turning into something else. The humans had exposed the first crack in the Council's control, and they had done it without firing a single missile. But this was just the beginning. The Council, embarrassed and losing trust, began preparing for a more direct conflict. But humanity was no longer the quiet force they had hoped to contain. Now, they were awake, alert, and more united than ever before. And while the galaxy still thought it was watching a political struggle, those who truly understood began to whisper once again about the prophecy. The sleeping flame had been stirred, and soon, it would burn brighter than ever. The Council had finally decided that silence was no longer enough. The embarrassment from the Station Rylos incident spread across systems faster than they had anticipated. Their reputation had started to crumble. Small colonies began pulling out of Council control, whispering about the lies that had come to light. The humans hadn't responded with weapons, yet the Council had lost more ground in 1 month than in the last 20 years. So, they shifted strategy. If quiet sabotage couldn't destroy humanity, then perhaps a sharp and unforgettable message could. Without declaring war, they sent a fleet toward the outer colony ships armed not with negotiation kits, but with orbital firepower capable of glassing entire city surfaces. Their plan was to erase one colony completely. Not to conquer it, but to burn it. To remind the galaxy who held power. They thought this brutal act would break humanity's spirit, bring fear back into the hearts of their people. But they had no idea what kind of fire humanity had already walked through, and how this new one would only forge them harder. The colony chosen was Calder's Reach, a peaceful settlement on the edge of the solar rim. It was not a military base, nor did it hold strategic value. But it had become a symbol of cooperation, a place where humans and other species worked side by side, building something better. Destroying it would send a message of hopelessness. The Council fleet arrived without warning, emerging from slipspace like shadows in the dark. Their ships hovered in orbit for only 20 minutes before they began the bombardment. Fire fell from the sky. Buildings turned to ash. Communication towers cracked and collapsed. The atmosphere was filled with smoke, and the screams of the innocent were drowned out by the roar of destruction. Not run or surrender. They saved each other. They carried the injured, shielded the young, and used whatever tools they could find to build emergency shelters. A group of children was trapped under a collapsed building, and a half-burned engineer, coughing blood, dug them out with his bare hands. Not a soldier. Not a fighter. Just a human who refused to leave anyone behind. When the attack ended, half the colony was gone. But what remained was stronger than before. News of the destruction spread quickly. But instead of panic, something else echoed across human space determination. People across the systems lit digital candles in honor of the fallen. Engineers began working double shifts to rebuild the relay network. Volunteers lined up to donate supplies, blood, and even ships to help survivors. The council expected fear, but got fury. Not the kind that explodes in violence, but the kind that burns quietly in the chest and pushes people to act, to rise. Even those who had never been to Calder's Reach now considered it part of their family. Humanity had always been fractured in the past, arguing and fighting over borders. But now, with one strike, the Council had united them completely. From Earth to Mars, from the rings of Saturn to the moons of Proxima, humans became one voice, one purpose. Not for revenge, but for justice and survival. In Unity's edge, leaders and thinkers gathered again. The images of the burning colony played in silence, but no one shed tears. Their eyes were dry, filled with purpose. The silent pushback was no longer enough. It was time to respond not with war, but with proof. The data they had collected, every lie, every order, every shadow deal was finally compiled into a master file. And then, with perfect timing, they sent it out. To every colony, every ally, every neutral system, and every species still sitting on the fence. The evidence was undeniable. The attack on Calder's Reach had not been a mistake or a rogue act, it was planned. And for what? Because humans refused to kneel? The response was instant. Independent media flooded with outrage. Civil uprisings broke out in council territories. Scientists, merchants, and even military officers began questioning their orders. A few defected, seeking sanctuary in human space. The council, once untouchable, now looked vulnerable. But humanity was not celebrating. They were preparing. Calder's Reach became a symbol not of destruction, but of rebirth. Within weeks, a temporary dome was raised. Survivors returned. Children who had lost their families were adopted by strangers who called them kin. No one waited for permission. Everyone did what needed to be done. A merchant captain diverted his cargo of luxury items to deliver water and tools. A retired pilot flew across a meteor storm just to deliver medical bots. It wasn't charity. It was something deeper, something human, a kind of stubbornness that refused to let evil win. In the ashes, the spirit of humanity burned brighter than ever. Far across the stars, the elders watched. The ancient species who had remained silent for generations now spoke in hushed tones. The prophecy that had once been dismissed returned to the front of their thoughts. It had warned of a young race, forged in suffering, who would rise when cornered and become a storm no one could stop. They had laughed before, but now they weren't laughing. The fire hadn't broken the humans. It had awakened them. Their strength was not in their weapons or their numbers. It was in their unity, their compassion, and their refusal to surrender. The council had made a terrible mistake, and now the storm was coming. But humanity didn't rush toward war. They moved with purpose, with patience. They reached out to those still uncertain, not with demands, but with hope. Help us build, they said, or stay silent and watch the galaxy fall into fear. And many chose to help. Alien engineers, scientists, even artists joined hands with humans. Together, they began building something new: stations of peace, corridors of aid, and defense systems that would protect, not threaten. It was not an empire. It was something far more dangerous to tyrants, a free and united front that answered to no council, but only to truth and justice. And deep within the shattered ruins of Calder's Reach, a memorial stood tall. Not a statue of war, but a simple column of light. At its base were the names of every life lost. Above it, in every language known across the stars, were etched the words, "You tried to silence us. But we remember. We rebuild. We rise." The fire may have fallen from the sky, but it had not broken them. It had revealed what they truly were. The galaxy held its breath as the days passed after the Calder's Reach attack. The flames had died down, but what was left behind was something no council weapon could erase: memory. Memory of the innocence lost, of the unshaken courage, and of the unity. Resistance, but instead they had lit a spark across the stars. Now every system watched, every leader hesitated, every ally reconsidered where they stood. The universe was no longer ignoring humanity, it was listening. That silence, that hesitation, became the battlefield of the mind, and in that uncertain silence, something began to shift. Leaders of independent planets started to gather secretly. Those who had once bowed to the Council's control now questioned its right to rule. They watched what humanity did next, not with fear, but with curiosity. Would they retaliate with blood, or would they choose a different path? What they saw was not an army marching, but engineers rebuilding. They saw not fleets of destruction, but transports filled with supplies and hope. It was not weakness. It was discipline. That calmness in the face of pain became more terrifying to the Council than any warship. For the first time in centuries, their commands were met with delay, questions, and doubt. Among the Council's ranks, whispers began to grow. One of their top generals, Admiral Thal, privately questioned the wisdom of the attack. He had seen the raw footage from Calder's Reach, had studied the faces of the survivors. He didn't see fear. He saw resolve. And he knew that kind of spirit could not be crushed, it could only be sharpened. Quietly, he reached out to a neutral system and began talks with one of humanity's diplomatic envoys. It was a risk, a betrayal by all traditional standards, but Thal was not alone. Several captains, once proud enforcers of Council law, began to pull their ships from planned operations, feigning malfunctions or rerouting to remote space docks. The Council noticed the delays, but they couldn't see the full picture forming. Their grip was loosening from within, not by weapons, but by will. Meanwhile, the humans were not waiting. At Unity's edge, the largest gathering in human history was underway. Delegates from dozens of systems, human and alien alike, stood together beneath a sky still scarred from earlier battles. No walls separated them. No guards stood between them. They were not there to dictate or to dominate. They were there to listen to each other, to the galaxy, and to the truth. That single event became the turning point, not just in the war of politics, but in the hearts of billions watching from afar. During the summit, a woman named Linya Joros took the stage. She was not a general or a diplomat. She'd been a teacher at Calder's Reach. She had lost her husband and her sister in the fires. Yet she stood there, her voice calm, her eyes clear, and spoke not of revenge, but of responsibility. "We must not become like them," she said. "We must rise, not with fire, but with light. We do not fight for domination. We fight for a future where no one else has to fear the sky falling." Her words reached more ears than any weapon ever could. Across the stars, her speech was translated into hundreds of languages and rebroadcast in places where warships couldn't reach. Something ancient stirred in the hearts of many, a sense of hope. That maybe, just maybe, this young species could build something better. Not just for themselves, but for everyone. And then, the unexpected happened. 3 systems, long considered loyal to the Council, announced their withdrawal from the Alliance. They shut down Council outposts and opened communication with Unity's edge. Their messages were simple: we choose the future. This single act sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Council scrambled to respond, but every aggressive move they planned risked proving humanity's point. They were trapped. Their fear became visible for the first time. They held more weapons, more fleets, but they were losing something more powerful: belief. The illusion of their control was shattering. Behind closed doors, the elders met again, silent and pale. For generations, they had believed their wisdom was enough to guide the galaxy. But now they wondered if they had been blind. The prophecy they had once buried echoed louder in their minds. Beware the ones who rise from fire, not with vengeance, but with vision. Could it be that humanity was that force? Had they awoken the very change they once feared? Back on Earth, no celebration was held. The humans didn't see this as a victory. They saw it as a challenge. The more the galaxy looked to them, the more responsibility they carried. Scientists worked harder, translators built bridges with new allies, and architects designed structures meant not for power, but for peace. The old image of humanity, wild, unpredictable, violent, was changing. Not through speeches, but through action. Even alien children began learning Terran Standard in schools, and human children were taught about alien histories and struggles. They didn't want to dominate the galaxy, they wanted to understand it, to heal it. Down on the conscience of entire civilizations. For so long, the elders had claimed to protect the galaxy by suppressing change, by controlling knowledge, and by punishing those who dared to dream differently. But now, with every message of peace coming from humanity, with every act of mercy instead of destruction, the lies of the past began to crack like glass. Archive centers, once hidden from the public, were stormed by citizens demanding truth. Files buried in encrypted cores were revealed, and what they showed sent waves of regret across the stars. Names of planets silenced, leaders assassinated, rebellions crushed, not for justice, but for control. And among those dark secrets was the truth about humanity's first contact, years ago, when they had arrived with open hands and curious minds, only to be labeled dangerous, isolated, and watched like a threat. The regret grew deeper when people realized humanity had not fired first. They had not attacked without cause. It had always been the Council pulling strings, shaping stories, and turning allies into enemies before a single honest conversation was ever allowed. Entire generations realized they had hated a species based on fear that was planted, not earned. In cities where humans were once feared, statues were now built in their honor, not because they conquered, but because they endured. The galaxy began to remember the names of humans who had died protecting alien children during the first Council attacks, engineers who stayed behind to stabilize crumbling colonies, and medics who treated enemies without hesitation. The regret turned into public outcry. Across thousands of systems, citizens demanded the Council step down. Some governments collapsed under the pressure. Others tried to cling to power, but the fear was gone, and without fear, their words carried no weight. The once mighty fleets of the Council sat in dock, their crews divided in loyalty and unsure of their mission. The elders, once untouchable, became silent. No broadcasts, no speeches, just shadows behind closed chambers. They knew their time had passed, and they watched helplessly as their carefully built empire unraveled. For the first time, they faced what they had long denied: the will of the people. And in that quiet downfall, they understood the prophecy they had once mocked was never about fire or war. It was about change. It was about those who could not be bent, who would not break, and who, through suffering, would awaken others. While the galaxy turned its back on its former masters, humanity did not rise with revenge. They stepped forward with humility. They helped rebuild what had been broken, not just on Earth, but everywhere. They invited former enemies to join their institutions, opened cultural exchange centers, and treated wounds that were not even theirs to heal. They sent teachers, scientists, and peacekeepers, not conquerors. They built something no fleet could defend, and no weapon could destroy: trust. It was not perfect, and not everyone accepted it at first, but it grew. It grew because it was real. Because the galaxy had seen them bleed, had seen them suffer, and had seen them rise with dignity when they could have chosen fury. This balance between strength and mercy became the new standard, and soon, former Council races began adopting human principles of governance, learning Terran law, studying their history, and understanding their mistakes. But even as the galaxy healed, the regret never left. It lived in the eyes of those who once voted for war. It echoed in the halls of schools, teaching a new generation about the truths their elders had hidden. It whispered in the wind on planets that had once cheered when the first bombs fell on human colonies. The galaxy knew now that it had failed a test of character, a test of fairness. And that failure could not be erased, only remembered. Humanity, in their grace, never demanded apologies, but those who carried guilt offered them anyway in public messages, in carved monuments, and in private acts of kindness toward those they once feared. Peace treaties were signed, not under pressure, but out of genuine desire. Former enemies stood beside human leaders and declared unity not as strategy, but as hope. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was no longer blind. In the years that followed, stories were told of the fire that didn't break them, the silent pushback that changed hearts, and the turning point that shook the foundation of an empire. But the most powerful stories were not of war, they were of forgiveness. Of people who reached across the stars to say, "We were wrong, and we will be better." And though it came late, the galaxy's regret became its strength. It remembered, it learned, and it promised itself never to make the same mistake again. Humanity had been challenged, tested, and underestimated. They responded with transformation. And in doing so, they turned the deepest regret of the galaxy into its greatest lesson.